Hello and welcome to the Joy of CX. I'm David Cox and today I'm absolutely delighted to have Roberto Rittes on the pod with me. Roberto's done many things in his life, but I know him best as the CEO of Nextel in Brazil, where he asked me to help him on the remarkable turnaround that I touched on in episode 8. Roberto is not only a highly successful CEO, but is also one of that rare breed of leaders that genuinely has the customer centricity gene deep in his bones. He knows that really success only comes when you start with the customer and work from there. And on top of that, he's one of the most inspirational business leaders that I've come across in my whole career. Someone who motivates everyone who works with him to give absolutely the best of themselves. So welcome, Roberto.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. So before we get into talking about the Nextel story as a case study in customer-led transformation, maybe you'd like to fill in the gaps a little bit in your background and experience and what led you to taking on that very real challenge that was leading Nextel out of the darkness and back into the light.
Perfect. So I think I had a quite unusual career in a sense that I moved industries and functional areas quite a lot. Those experiences, I think, all helped me a lot once I became the CEO, which is by nature, multidisciplinary job. Anyway, I started my career as a banker. I did investment bank in New York for UBS. My first 2 years, I was Latin banker, but after a couple of years, I decided to go to an industry group, and through a colleague that had moved to the telecom group, I decided to follow him. So 25 years later, I'm still involved with telecom thanks to that decision. After banking, I decided to go to business school to rethink life and take a break and think about the future. And after business school, I decided to leave banking and go into a company. I wanted to have a team, people around, getting things done. I think I had enough of PowerPoint and Excel, even though I still use them a lot. But I wanted to getting things done in the real world. And I ended up working for a telecom company for which I had done a few M&A projects before. So it's one of those things of, being an advisor and eventually jumping off the fence and joining the clients. And I think that was the second block of my career. I stayed for 7 years with that company, actually 4 with that company, and 3 would, post that company, Brazil Telecom, was acquired by Oi. They were both fixed line and originally fixed line businesses that had also moved into mobile. And I continued on for 3 additional years with Oi. At Brazil Telecom, I was the director of the marketing team. And later I moved to be the head of business development and also of the mobile business unit for Brazil Telecom. After the 7 years, I went back to my financial roots and spent 6 years working in the private equity space. I worked for 2 portfolio companies of 2 Brazilian private equity funds. And I spent some time at HIG Capital, American private equity investor. And I was responsible for creating its value creation team in Brazil. Basically the people that help to bring cost efficiency, growth, and most of the times to try to put the fires down when you have a company going through a lot of financial and operating distress. And that was the 3rd chapter of my career, private equity. And right after HIG Capital came Nextel, which I think that leveraged all those previous experiences. So was a company in financial distress. So it needed the operating turnaround, something that, I had developed a model for that at HIG Capital. We're going through a financial restructuring, of course, but renegotiating with creditors, with suppliers. So a lot of my banking and financial experience. And of course, telecom. So even though I, in this career, change functional responsibilities and all that, I think all those came together in Nextel.
So an incredibly rich background. What I was hoping is maybe we've led up now to Nextel. It would be great if you could just talk us through a little bit. What was the challenge when you took Nextel on? What was the mountain that you had to climb? What was the context of the business there? And what was facing you when you walked through the door?
So giving a bit of context before, Nextel had for many years a quite successful business with its original product we call the push to talk. Basically, similar to a radio walk talk type of function. And it's interesting that from the outside, they never fully appreciated how good Nextel had. They were basically a monopolist of a niche product. And that turned out to be pretty good because not everybody wanted the push to talk, the IDEN product, but for those that wanted, they only could get that from Nextel. So they were very successful. Unfortunately, at one point, the product started to die out, and it all started when Sprint bought Nextel in the US and decided to abandon the technology. And year after year, it started losing critical mass, handsets, network, radio equipment. So eventually the product died, not only because its own issues, as I mentioned, but also because the traditional mobile world was bringing good substitutes for some of its features. So instead of using the radio, the push to talk, I think WhatsApp with the audio message, I think provided, a good upgrade, a good replacement for that. But when I joined Nextel, it was they were trying to migrate from the radio into the 3G, 4G operator because I think took too long for them to decide to bite the bullet and tackle this migration. They were actually without the resources to build a full network for the 3G, 4G across the country. So at the time, Nextel had only operations in São Paulo and Rio, two states in Brazil, the most important states in the country, with a total population of 45 million inhabitants, so fairly sizable. But in any case, a regional player competing against four national operators in the 3G, 4G space. With that, even though they had some early successes migrating people from the radio product to the 3G, 4G, at one point, with around 2.5 million subs, they stalled. So they had a business that was not growing. Still, they sold a fair amount, but they had a very high churn, 4.5% per month at the time that I joined the company. It's still losing a lot of money. So Nextel had about minus 10% EBITDA margin in its mobile business when you consider it standalone. And if you put CapEx on top, so it was massively burning money, was fairly leveraged. And its parent company, a New York Stock Exchange listed entity, NI Holdings, was running out of money. So we needed to fix things rather quickly, not only to decrease the bleeding and the cash burn, but also creating momentum to raise more money and continue investing on the business.
Fantastic. And I think, I came on board relatively early in that journey. And I know that we were really, really clear right from the word go that this needed to be a genuinely customer-led turnaround. This wasn't just a question of financial engineering and cost cutting and all that kind of stuff, but really we had to put the customer at the center of turning the business around. Could you talk us through a little bit what that meant, what that translated into, how you achieved the magic of the turnaround?
So this was a very broad turnaround. I mean, yes, we had a lot of cost cutting and personnel services and reworking a lot of process to do that more efficiently. But also the company had at the time about 10, 11% market share in the regions it operated. So to be profitable, we needed to be around 15%. So that was only cost cutting was not going to be enough. So we needed to really get growth going. And we needed to try to and that was something that I led, but of course, together with the team, was trying to find what was a viable and potentially strong value proposition for Nextel. I think Nextel was a little bit lost. It's in its new scenario, 3G, 4G, it didn't really had a reason for people to buy it. It had aggressive prices, but at the same time had some handicaps. When you know one thinks about all things that matter to clients, be it network quality, handset offer, value-added services, brands, almost all those elements were uphill battles for Nextel, given its regional position versus nationwide operators. Given its financial distress, a lot of those elements we knew that we would have to work really hard to reduce the gap, but none of them would be a differentiation factor, something that would drag and attract customers to Nextel. But, and this was back in 2017, was clear that the industry neglected customer satisfaction, and none of the other four operators had actually dominated this space, being the leader in having happy clients and designing products and process and the whole company, for that matter, around the customer needs and trying to make the clients' lives as easy as possible for consuming our services. And not only that space was vacant, but also that was probably the single element of, and we listed 15 different elements that matter to clients, that being smaller made it easier to achieve a leadership on that element. Different from our competitors, we didn't have as many legacy systems. Our competitors, they were the result of various acquisitions, so they had to deal with legacy systems from the predecessor companies. And Nextel, being a single company in a similar shape for 20 years, it was much easier on the system perspective, the whole customer service operation, fewer partners, fewer customer care centers. So it was one that was very relevant for clients. Nobody really dominated that element, and something that actually was achievable for us, being the smallest with the least amount of financial means to dominate.
So I understand then that you're really putting your focus on the customer experience, certainly in those early days, as frictionless an experience as possible. What were some of the kind of tools and approaches that really helped you to bring that to reality for the customer? What was the kind of formula that you used to really drive that transition towards frictionless customer experience leadership?
Stepping back a little bit, on top of this very rational value proposition decision for Nextel, always being a big believer that telecoms would spend hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars in network, in other investments, and completely neglected customer service. Customer service, in the big scheme of things, is a fairly reasonable / small expense, and that has been experienced with almost all operators that I interacted. Is seen as a cost to be minimized and not as a differentiator, as a key element of value proposition. But when we got there, I think the first wave was to get rid of the nonsense. And there was a fair amount of nonsense, from process, incentives to call center partners, business decisions and business rules. And that was something that actually was fairly easy to come with a first wave of changes that would create some initial momentum for that customer experience drive. Because one thing that I had very clear, and when I joined the company, given the financial situation of Nextel, I was welcomed with a fair amount of skepticism from senior management and the broader company, kind of as if the ship is sinking and we're here to hug trees and make clients happy. Of course, since the beginning, I'm a very rational, data-driven guy. On top of my belief that in a service business, if you don't have happy clients, you're never going to have a good business, I emphasize to people with data that we quickly collect that if you move a client from a detractor into neutral, you reduce churn by 60%. If you move the guy from neutral to promoter, you again reduce churn 50%. So kind of showing to them there was a business case behind that customer satisfaction and happy clients drive. But it still took results and basically NPS going up and churn going down for the virtual cycle to kick in and the company to go full blown to support the plan. That said, the initial wave is very quickly. Is the nonsense. You get the people around and people know that these things don't make sense, but the previous commercial VP, the previous customer service VP, so there are good reasons once got the people around and pushed them as to what can be fixed, we got a good first wave of improvements that we could implement from the get-go. But that was just the kickoff of that process. In parallel, I was very fortunate to meet you because, to be quite frank, I value very strongly customer satisfaction and I understood the business rationale for that. But I didn't have actual full blown out plan how to implement it. That's when with the two of us met, I understood your model that you've been working for many years in different settings. And that's when we start to implement it. And if you move forward a little bit to today's world, it's almost impossible to find a CEO or a C-level executive that doesn't track NPS. But an NPS is just like the thermometer. It tells you if your fever is going up or down, but doesn't help you to pinpoint what's wrong with you. And I think your model, by breaking down NPS into the different moments of the customer journey and creating trackable and very pragmatic measurements from the perspective of the client, I think was a match made in heaven. I had ambition. I was able to convince people that that was the way to go. But right after this initial wave of quick fixes, we went headfirst in implementing the David Cox customer centricity model.
That's brilliant, Roberto. And I think, obviously we've talked over various episodes of this podcast, the detail of what that model looked like. Maybe just briefly, would you mind explaining it, how it felt from your perspective? What did the, as you kindly put it, the David Cox model, what did that give you? What did that enable you to do from your perspective as the CEO?
When you talk about customer centricity, it means that you should take customers' perceptions and customers' preference very strongly and kind of fixing, shaping, building things, taking the customer input. That's much easier said than done. I had a long history in trying to improve customer experience, and a lot of times you basically do inferences based on your team's experience and preferences, and inferences what needs to be fixed to make the client happier. But that's kind of the shotgun approach, is as if you're trying to fix everything that's broken, not working, imperfect. But unfortunately, any company and mobile operators more so than many other sectors, you probably have a couple decades of, work to fix everything that's, doesn't work in a mobile operator. So I think that's kind of a lost cause, and you're basically going to be lost in the woods trying to fix everything that's not ideal. I think with your model, instead of looking into NPS, that's overall experience, you kind of break to something more pragmatic, more contained into the different moments of the journey. In our case, we had 8 moments of the journey. For example, purchasing was one moment. From your web experience, finding out about our plans or benefits, into actually purchasing either in the store or online, the different channels. Then you go into activate, you bought it. So how do I activate the service? After activate, use. So we're dividing in the different moments, and you create a very simple survey on the moment of the journey. Because today, I mean, a lot of the companies, they have the NPS, that is very high level survey that, is this broad relationship, everything that went on in this relationship for months, years. And they have also the CSATs. That's something very operational to measure this specific contact that you had with, a call center, with, some support channel or some channel of the company. And you basically create something in between. You say, listen, let's look into this experience, this big process that you went through purchasing. And we would have a survey that we would actually base on a sample. And, I think we had good statisticians. So we had a fairly small sample, but would ask a portion of the people that bought the service in the last 30 days, how did they, if they liked or not the purchasing experience. So yes or no question. So, I think it's very clever, because I'm a big fan of NPS, but NPS is a weird metric. I mean, you move from 9 to 8, and you go from 1 to 0. So it creates a lot of volatility. And in my mind, I mean, 8 is good, for others, 8 is bad. So I think NPS has a fair amount of its own issues. So you want something simple. Were you happy with the purchasing process? Yes or no? And every time somebody said no, would ask why. And we'll tabulate all those answers, and we'll track, not only the no, the insatisfaction. And we had a lot of debates if we should, have as the KPI percent of clients satisfied or unsatisfied. But we decided to go with unhappy clients. And we'll track that metric. But more importantly, we would tabulate and would compile the data of the comments of the reasons that people were not happy. And we would go from, the most popular ones down, basically fixing those and removing, at the end of the day, removing friction. And I mean, they're complex things, but some are not. So, for example, on one of the journeys that I think we had, one of the biggest improvements was the pay journey. So people every month have to pay, they receive the bills and they pay the bill. And I think when we started, we were around 30% of the clients that were not satisfied with that journey. And in 15 months, I think we're down to below 10. And there was a lot of things we've done. We fixed the bill. We had a horrible bill. Would send the bill by email, but I mean, was an attachment, and the email had a weird subject, weird text. We fixed that, something very clear. The guy could understand that was the bill. Look in the body of the email. He knew everything he needed, how much he owed us, when the bill was due. We improve a lot on payment methods. We provide confirmation when people paid. We help people to get a copy of the invoice if for some reason they lost the original copy. If they were delinquent, it was very easy for them to get an updated bill, for them to settle whatever they own us. So there was literally, 20, 30 changes to different elements in this macro flow to try to make the client's life easier. But for me, the key element is not based on what I think is important to the clients. So you get away with the inferences, and you let the clients tell you, I don't like this because of A, B, and C. And you basically cycle about getting rid of A, B, and C.
And from what I remember of those times, this very strong memory of, is you're rightly articulating here, this kind of dogged pursuit of the frictionless vision, the month in, month out, correcting, making all those kind of fine tuning changes that gradually improve the overall experience. But also, I have this strong memory also of you personally holding your leadership team to account, holding their feet to the fire, making sure that they were the ones that were driving, that they were taking this seriously, that they were actively driving their teams to make these changes, to listen to customers and to respond to them. Is that how it felt from your perspective?
100%. But I think the method helps a lot because at the end of the day, so each of these moments of the client journey had an owner. Okay. Normally, this owner was a senior manager, not a director, somebody that, its core functions had the most synergies with that moment. So, for example, purchasing would be somebody within the commercial area that has most impact into the touch points in the purchasing moment of the journey. But the fact that each of these owners had a KPI that every month we could see it's improving, it's getting better, it's getting worse, made it very easy. Because I think if you don't have a very objective way to track if you're moving the right direction, you're going to have a lot of free riders. No, we are working. No, this is very important for us. At the end of the day, it was not about speech, no, it was not about to be aligned in theory, was in actually improving the customer's life in that piece of the journey that these people are responsible for. So I think having the metric, it completely changed everything. As you know, David, I've been for the last few years boards and consultants. And as a consultant, I implemented your method in a few companies. And for a lot of reasons, in a few of these times, we didn't implement this KPI of satisfied customers per moment of the journey. And that breaks the whole cycle because people get going, doing a lot of things, and you see a big list of improvements, but it's very hard to measure if it's working. And it's kind of this shotgun approach, is spray and pray. You fix a lot of things in hope that some of those are going to resonate with clients. When I think your approach with the survey and the KPI is more the sniper, I don't need to fix 10 things. I'm going to fix the 3, the 4, the 5 that really matter to clients. And I'm going to be ambitious about how well I fix them, how quick I fix them. So I think the metric made it very easy. And of course, choosing the right people, because if you have 2, 3, 4 that take it very serious and engage and start to get results, I think you create this peer pressure for others to move on. So, of course, I love the topic. And something I learned trying to do transformations, particularly on private equity companies, if you want to transform a business, the leader of the transformation is the CEO. If the CEO is involved, it's not enough because people are going to take advantages of your uncertainties, hesitations, lack of commitments, be it the customer centricity, be it the cost cutting. I was the one leading and leaving no room for people to take advantage of vacuums, of uncertainties, and making very clear that this was extremely important and the future of the business depended on this and showing 100% commitment. But I think your KPIs, some good people that got excited with this and made quick and impactful improvements made my life quite easy.
So just giving you the opportunity to blow your own trumpet a little bit here, Roberto, just help us to contrast, you talked about the turnaround and we're really talking about a more or less kind of 2-year period. Just help us contrast the Nextel that you created 2 years down the line compared with what you took on at the beginning. What was the result of all of this? What did this dogged pursuit of frictionless experience and putting the customer at the center, what did that achieve from a business perspective? What did the new improved Nextel look like?
It completely changed the business. And it's interesting that when we presented kind of the OKRs and the goals to shareholders. And at the time we had minority shareholder and NI holdings. A lot of people, I mean, they like the direction we are going, but they're very skeptical of our ability to meet those targets. And we actually exceeded all targets and was a very quick transformation. Of course, that says the company was in terrible shape. So there was a lot of the so-called low-hanging fruits. But some examples. So churn, when I joined, churn was 4.5% per month. In less than a year, churn was close to 2%, and we were between 2 and 2.5% for a couple years. Customer acquisition costs, we had CAC close to $100 and reduced CAC to $60. EBITDA, as I said, for excluding a little bit of EBITDA that we had for the radio when I joined, EBITDA for the 3G, 4G business was -10. And by the time, this was 2017, by the time we sold the business to Claro and then the 2019, EBITDA was in the high teens. One of the goals, and as I said, there was repositioning, rebranding, customer experience is the cornerstone of our value proposition, a lot of cost cutting, a lot of layoffs. So we let go about a third of the employees of the company in the first 6 months. That's something that was front loaded. But even with this complicated agenda of cost cutting, changing suppliers, things that people don't like, the employee NPS went from close to 40% of detractors. Imagine a company that close to 40% of the employees wouldn't recommend, would give 6 or less when they would recommend people working at the company. So it went from 40% detractors to, I think, 5% detractors. So that was quite interesting because it was a very intense turnaround, but at the same time, the results, and of course, we created a lot of communication channels. We created a lot of clarity for people where you wanted to go. There was a lot of investment, and you, David, really helped me on this because one thing that you were very hard at me is, and took me a little bit of time to fully understand, is that you're only going to have happy clients if you have happy employees. So you can't deliver something to the outside world if you don't have this in your own house. So, and right after we got all those more financial oriented, subscriber oriented changes, we applied the same ambition to the employees and the same methodologies. We divided the employee journey in different moments. We created KPIs for the different moments. And I think we were able to create this positive cycle of engagement, of believing in the future, and all those great things that help to deliver the financial results that I just mentioned earlier.
Fantastic. So, I mean, incredible the results that were achieved. And just wondering, in terms of the kind of learnings for you, what worked well? Obviously, you've talked about the KPIs and the measurement and this dogged pursuit of frictionless experience. We've talked about the importance of making sure that your employees are engaged and fired up as well. Was there anything else that, in terms of kind of secrets of success, that you'd like to touch on just to complete the picture of what enabled you really to make such a success of this turnaround?
As the CEO, I think was I took a, at the time, honestly, it was something, there was so many things going on, but I didn't pay too much attention. I mean, I paid, but now I value even more so than I did at the time. 1 week before I was going to be announced as the new CEO, they were going to let the previous CEO go. I was asked what I wanted to do, 3 vice presidents that we had on the company. So my predecessor had 5 direct reports and 3 VPs and HR and legal. And I asked for a couple of days to think about it. And I came back with the decision that I wanted to let all 3 VPs go. 2 of them were dismissed as my predecessor was dismissed. The third one I kept him for 3 months, but announced when I introduced myself to the company that he was going to stay for 3 months to help the transition, but he would go as well. I only did that because I knew that I had quite a few talent under those people. I mean, I'm a big believer in a flat organization. But more so, I knew that there were like 3 or 4 people that were like stars and that being limited and constrained by their leaders. So, by letting this VPs go, end up with 12 direct reports at the beginning. Over time, I think I decreased to 8 or 9. But I knew that these people with the right guidance, turbocharged by the fact that they became direct reports of the CEO, will lead the transformation. So I think was fortunate, and that's probably true in a lot of companies. The more you go down, the more talent you find. And directors, managers, analysts, consultants, I mean, there's a lot of talent. I let some people go at the beginning, and then there was organizational changes, right sizing, so we let some other goes. But there were a fair number of people that left because they didn't believe the plan. And I think the space that the firings, these people that left created, gave room for this talent that we had within the company to flourish. I think one of the lessons is look deep into your company. Probably there are a lot of talents that are being underutilized. And the one thing I believe on that before and after Nextel more so, vice presidents, directors, senior people, they normally gatekeepers and they do very little. So a lot of times, if you let these people go and create a more flat organization, things are going to move at a faster pace. And at the end of the day, simpler organizational chart makes your life a little bit easier.
And I think also just from observation, what I saw was that those people that you did promote up to helping you to drive the business really did share your vision for that, customer-led transformation. They bled customer as well. And I think that union of kind of youth and passion and desire that fed into your vision really is what turbocharged the delivery of the changes that you needed to make across the business. On the flip side, though, was there anything that, looking back on it, didn't work so well, that fell into the sort of category of could do better?
Yes, there were a few things. I inherited pretty sizable investments in digital native, a digital telecom product. And that product never really took off. I think at the end of the day, the approach that most telecom operators take is to create a second brand for the digital product. And for a company that's struggling to create meaning and traction for its first brand, it's really difficult to create a second brand. Halfway through, this became clear to me, and I wanted to pivot to replace my main product with the digital product. So all clients use the digital product. So you don't have traditional products and digital product. You replace traditional with digital. But at the end of the day, the costs that we had on that digital platform forbid me from doing that. But, it's still today, I think finally, this is getting traction in our industry. You're seeing in different geographies, digital products is starting to get some traction. And as you know, David, I'm involved with Nubank into their digital product. That's in early days. I mean, we launched this year and the full launch is going to happen until the end of the year. But I'm excited that finally it's kicking off. Maybe 2017, 18 was too early for that. But for me, it didn't need to take, almost 10 years for creating a truly digital experience as other segments have done to be relevant in the industry. Taking friction and moving detractors to neutral. I think with your model, it's pretty simple. I mean, there is no mystery. It's just getting, understanding out of the many things that you don't do great, what's important to client and fixing them with ambition. But we struggle to create those wall experiences. So things that was an agenda that we built to bring people from neutral into promoters, creating this unexpected, super engaging and transformational experiences. I mean, we played with different things. Some things, most things didn't work at all. Some did work, but we're not able to scale them up. So at the end of the day, they were neat kind of stories, but with no real meaningful impact. So I think agenda of creating something that's really a love brand or something that has, and that's at the end of the day, I think is one of the challenges of our industry. I mean, if you see the best performance, and I've seen NPSs, of course, NPS is a measurement that varies a lot depending on the way you conduct the survey. But with more stable surveys, with proper methods, I would say that the leaders in the industry are in the high 30s, maximum in low 40s. And if you compare that to financial services, that you're nobody if you're not in 50, 60% NPS. So I think also, probably similar to airlines, the nature of the service we offer extremely complex. And it's something that is prone to, from time to time, to have a bad experience. So you have a big rain, you're going to lose energy. If you lose energy, or even, you have outages, you have things that from time to time, your service is going to have a flaw. And I think this is a very complex in the infrastructure that delivers them. And unfortunately, you have still a high level of incidents that taint this experience. But as you remember, we set up our moonshot of a 50 points NPS, and we never made it beyond, I think, 35 or 36. So, of course, I mean, we end up selling the business. Not sure if you had 2, 3 more years, if we're going to have cracked the codes. But I think
I must say that was the point I was going to make, actually, that potentially it was a question of effectively running out of time before we had to sell the business. Because I think, as you rightly point out, that drive towards a truly differentiated experience that makes customers fall in love with you, that's a next step on from reducing the friction and getting the basics right. It does take time to build that relationship. Any relationship takes time to build. And potentially we were starting down that road, but the business has sold before we had the opportunity to really see
and I think
the results
perceptions
of that.
are hard to change. For you to, move 2 steps, 3 steps on that perception level is complicated. But at the same time, creating something that's truly impeccable, something that really delivers in all sense, is complicated. So going from something that's broken into something that, doing the basics right, that's fairly easy. There's a lot of impact. There is no mystery. With your model, if you have the right engagement, if the leadership buys into it, it's going to happen. It may take a little bit more time, less time, but you're going to get there. But moving from, doing the basics right into something that's a different level, that's more complicated. I think you're into unknown territory, sort of.
Fantastic. And I was just going to ask, whether there was any advice you give to other leaders embarking on this kind of customer-led turnaround, or customer experience transformation. Is there any advice that you would give to other business leaders that would really help them to take on these kind of challenges?
Advice is like, talk to David Cox. I was very fortunate to run into you. And as for benefit of listeners, David went to Brazil. As we had a European group that did a minority investment into Nextel, and David went to Brazil to do due diligence on Nextel and customer service, customer experience due diligence. During, the 2, 3 months that he was doing due diligence, I got to know him. I got to know his method. And as I said, match made in heaven. I jump into him and say, you're not going back to the UK. You're going to stay with me here and you're going to help me to transform this business. But, as I said, NPS is a good thermometer and you need them. So you know how you fare vis-a-vis your competitors. You can track momentum. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? But by no means is going to provide you with guidance what you need to fix. You need to break down, these very broad experiences into, these pieces of the customer experience with trackable measures. And I think your method, and we cover some of the more high level elements, but there is a lot of details. I think, you probably, I don't know how many years, David, but probably 20 years fine tuning this.
Exactly.
I think that avoid the gunshot approach. Avoid making inferences, your team or yourself trying to guess what's not working for the clients. Customer centricity means letting the client decide what needs to be fixed. Of course, you need method, because I used to go to the Instagram, to the Facebook page, and it's important because I think that makes your blood boil when you see, all these good people saying all those horrible things about your business. One of the things that a lot of people do, but I value those, and I made all my team listen to call center calls. We would send every week comments that we would get on social media from clients. The beginning, they were almost all negative, and some of them extremely negative. And those are important because I think they makes the problems real. I think when you're just looking at KPIs, numbers, they just look like numbers. And at times would put the photos of the people to say, this person looks like a good guy, is like saying all those horrible things about our companies. So these things are important. But at the end of the day, you're not going to manage your business. You're not going to fix your customer service based on comments that you see on social media. Those are just random. I mean, you need something that's more structured. You need something that's, has some method. But, I mean, today for most services, and that's something that it's kind of the center point. Most segments, most services, I mean, they're not growing that much. So I think a lot of companies are obsessed with growth, and telecom is one of them. The energy that's put in attract new clients, when not losing a client is your best growth strategy. So focus on having happier clients. Happy clients don't leave as much, and create a method. And I would strongly recommend that you use the David Cox method to, drill down from NPS and understand with a system what's broken and put your energy to fix it. It creates incredible benefits. And at the end of the day, one thing is people take pride to deliver good service. I mean, when I joined the company, that was one of the big things on this bad employee NPS. We're the number 4 in a 5-player market. We only lost to a company that actually went into bankruptcy. Oi. We're only ahead of Oi. So, I mean, people don't be in a place like this that delivers a poor service. And at the end of the day, is a little bit of that broken window theory. If you deliver poor service to your clients, that's going to trickle down to all internal and all business areas. On top of the direct benefits, there are a lot of indirect benefits of delivering a top service and being quality leader. In our case, we saw that it's not easy, but at the end of the day, doing the basics right, it's also not rocket science. I think with a structured method and ambition, you're going to get there.
Fantastic. Roberto, this really has been a fascinating conversation. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to take us through that and, from really giving us the perspective from your side, the view from the top, if you like. I think that's been absolutely invaluable. So thank you very much for your time.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, David. I'm very thankful for all the great work. I think you're one of the cornerstones of the Nextel story. There are a few, but you're certainly out there. And it's a pleasure, even if you, as is the case now, you're disturbing my vacations in Mauritius. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
I'll let you go back to your holidays. Thank you, Roberto.
Very welcome, David.